the banks of the Yellow River, northern China. Here nearly 6,000 years ago a flourishing settlement emerged, of a type that far exceeded any that the region had seen before. At its height, nearly 1,000 people may have called it home, a total made possible by the full-scale adoption of agriculture. Within its boundaries, hundreds of square and rectangular buildings would have housed families and different kin groups, each sustained by a diet of domesticated pig and millet. All these were dwarfed, however, by a monumental building erected at the site's heart, built using innovative construction methods, and which appears to have been the focus of communal activities and new forms of ritual expression. As unprecedented as its scale was, this site would soon be joined by others that spread throughout the region, many of which acted as centres for their surrounding villages. And in these larger settlements, we see signs that the more egalitarian society of the early Neolithic is coming to an end. In its place, a new era of social complexity is dawning, one marked by the emergence of inequality, mass feasting, and clear signs of a new institution that would persist throughout the remainder of Chinese history. Rulers. The early Neolithic was a time of gradual change for the communities of eastern China. During this period, which lasted from roughly 7,000 to 5,000 BCE, we saw the emergence of the region's earliest farming settlements, which were marked by more sedentary living, the widespread use of pottery, and the increasing appearance of polished stone tools associated with the construction of more permanent dwellings. Within these settlements, we saw the rearing of domesticated dogs and pigs, along with varieties of rice and millet that increasingly resembled domesticated forms. Elsewhere, we saw evidence for early forms of ritual expression, including the elaborate burial of items found at the site of Jiahu, and the appearance of both painted pottery and animal and humanoid figurines. In the south, we also saw the construction of ceremonial altars and platforms at sites such as Bashidang, Chaotou, and Kwahuchao, structures which would have required significant labour investment. But despite the increasing management of crops and animals by these peoples, their settlements remained comparatively small, and in many cases the majority of their diet continued to come from the gathering of wild resources. In this episode, however, we will see the end of this hybrid farming and gathering lifestyle throughout much of China. Today we move forward into the Middle Neolithic, a period marked by the emergence of settlements that dwarfed those of earlier millennia, and which were wholly dependent on agriculture for their survival. With this change, we also see increasing investment in new forms of public architecture and the emergence of a more complex social hierarchy, which in some areas is headed for the first time by an institutional elite. At the end of our last episode, we discussed some of the possible reasons for the adoption of agriculture by early Neolithic communities both throughout China and the wider world. In today's episode, we shall begin by briefly discussing another development that often appears alongside farming and that many archaeologists have argued may be a direct consequence of its adoption. It is during the Middle Neolithic that we will see the first appearance of social inequality in many of China's contemporary cultures, which often takes the form of a group of elites that are visible in both housing patterns and burial traditions. The exact factors that allow this social inequality to emerge are not fully understood, but it seems likely that they are enabled by changes in social conditions brought about by agriculture. For example, in the book The Human Past, Professor Chris Scarr argues that the increasing size of settlements made possible by agriculture would have required new types of social organisation. In smaller hunter-gatherer communities, any disputes were likely solved in simple fashions, such as through individuals leaving to form new groups. By comparison, he argues that the larger settlements that resulted from agriculture would have inherently led to an increased range of social roles and conflicts. To cope with this, more formalised methods of decision-making and conflict resolution would likely have been needed, which may have resulted in the emergence of institutional positions within these communities. Initially, these positions could have been held by particularly skilled or charismatic individuals, but over time they seem to have become tied to specific families and kin groups. Another major factor in the appearance of this inequality may also have been that the adoption of farming may have led to the production of larger agricultural surpluses, which certain competitive individuals may have come to monopolise. This surplus could then have been selectively distributed to the rest of the population in order to bolster their support. And alongside this, the increased production of jade carvings and elaborate pottery by these societies may also have played into these elite figures' hands, as the hoarding and careful redistribution of these high-prestige items would only have increased their power. With the increasing role of these elites in mind, let us continue by following the development of early farming communities over the course of the Middle Neolithic. In China, this period lasted from between roughly 5000 to 3000 BCE and coincided with the peak of what is known as the early Holocene climatic optimum. With the exception of occasional episodes of climatic deterioration, throughout much of this time China's climate was both warmer and wetter than today. Alongside this increasingly favourable climate, we continue to see vast increases in both the number and size of settlements throughout China, along with the appearance of new archaeological cultures. As in previous episodes, let us begin by examining the development of Middle Neolithic communities in the north. Whilst the western reaches of the Yellow River Valley remained largely non-agrarian, its central and lower reaches saw the emergence of settlements dependent on agriculture for survival. Around 5300 BCE, the early Neolithic Holy culture was succeeded in the east by the Beixin culture, which consisted of roughly 100 known sites situated on floodplains throughout the provinces of Tongxian and Shandong. Around 4300 BCE, this culture would in turn be succeeded by the long-lived Dawenhou culture, the later phases of which would persist until around 2600 BCE. Sites belonging to this culture are spread over a much wider area than its predecessor, and over 500 sites have been discovered throughout parts of Shandong, Jiangsu, Anhui, and Hunan province. Around 5000 BCE, the Yangshao culture also emerged throughout a vast area of the Middle Yellow River region, and over the next 2 millennia more than 5000 sites associated with this culture would be established throughout the provinces of Hebei, Henan, Shanxi, and Shanxi, along with parts of Inner Mongolia. Each of these cultures are marked by the continuance of the sedentary living we observed here in the early Neolithic, and over the course of the 5th millennium BCE, these cultures grew increasingly reliant on domesticated plants and animals for survival. Though the earliest people of the Beixin culture still retained something of a foraging hunter-gatherer lifestyle, their settlements gradually came to rely on the rearing of domesticated millet, pigs, and dogs to provide a significant portion of their diet. Over time, this reliance would increase, and the early sites of the succeeding Dawenhou culture likely consist of year-round farming villages. By comparison, many early Yangshao sites show an unprecedented degree of reliance on sedentary agriculture, and by this point, it likely already provided the majority of these people's diet. In addition to the widespread rearing of now domesticated forms of millet, both Yangshao and Dawenhou sites also show some of the earliest evidence for the collection and possible cultivation of soybeans, though currently it is not thought that these remains represent a domesticated species. During this time, the earlier microlith-based toolset of the region was largely replaced by groundstone tools, including large numbers of axes, adzes, sickles, spades, harvesting knives, and other items associated with large-scale agriculture and construction. Both the quantity and quality of pottery produced by these societies also increased. At Yangshao settlements, large amounts of painted red slip pottery have been unearthed, that were likely fired in early kilns, many of which bear white and black geometric patterns, as well as images of animal figures and human facial features. Whilst Beixin culture pottery is more simply decorated, by the time of the early Dawenhou culture, ceramics with similarly elaborate decorations emerge, and there is evidence that early forms of pottery wheel were also likely in use at both Dawenhou and Yangshao settlements, beginning from around 3500 BCE. In addition to these changes, the settlements of the north are also marked by new social developments. A good example of this can be found at the Yangshao site of Jiangjai, near the modern city of Xi'an. In its earliest stages, this settlement consisted of a small village covering some 5 hectares, which was enclosed within a surrounding ditch and was home to perhaps 100 people at any given time. This site was marked by 5 major groupings of small and medium subterranean or ground-level houses, along with a central plaza and a single large building that were likely used for communal tool-making activities. Since the site's discovery, a number of theories have been put forward to explain this organizational structure. One early theory proposed by Chinese archaeologists was that these groups of buildings belonged to matrilineal family groupings. An alternative theory is that these different groupings are but one aspect of a complex social hierarchy of individual families, households, and clans. Despite these increasingly complex internal arrangements, the sites of both the early Yangshao and Beixin cultures still appear to have remained broadly egalitarian. Evidence of this can be seen in contemporary burial traditions. At Jiangzhai, people largely continued to bury their dead in distinct cemeteries outside of the village boundaries, with each cemetery perhaps being related to one of its 5 residential groups. Here people continued to be buried in graves of roughly equal size, whilst grave goods largely consist of utilitarian tools and pottery. A similar arrangement can also be seen in Beixin and early Dawenhou culture graves. Here, however, burials show clear signs of a gender distinction, with male burials tending to include items associated with manual labour, whilst female burials often contain pottery and bone awls that may have been associated with basket making and the manufacture of clothing. Over the course of the 5th millennium BCE, the complexity of these societies continued to increase, and during the 4th millennium BCE, we begin to see signs of new social developments in this region. The population of the north continued to grow, and Dawenhou and Yangshao sites began to spread over wider ranges, with individual settlements becoming both larger and more dense. At the top of this hierarchy, we see large sites such as Shipo, Dongshuangchao, and Beiyangping that cover areas between 40 to 95 hectares, and which possibly acted as regional centres for their surrounding villages. Whilst these centres were likely still self-sufficient agricultural communities, their size and central location may have facilitated trade and joint ritual activities within their immediate vicinities. Alongside this, we also see clear signs of elites and social hierarchies appearing in Yangshao settlement layouts and housing, along with ritual architecture on an unprecedented scale. At Shipo, 2 large houses have been found positioned at the settlement centre, each of which would have required significant manpower to construct. The earliest and largest of these covers an area of some 200 metres squared and consists of a roughly square building that was entered by a long external corridor. This substantial structure was further supported by a 1 metre high earthen wall and 69 wooden posts, and it is likely that a large fireplace was situated near its entrance. In another innovation for the period, the upper layer of this building's floor was constructed from a mixture of highly compacted straw and clay known as rammed earth, more refined versions of which are still employed as a construction material today. Once completed, the floors and walls of this building were painted with a red pigment derived from cinnabar, a rare material that was also used in burial practices during this period. At the time of its initial construction, this building was likely surrounded by an open area free of domestic features such as storage pits, and it has been argued by the site's excavators that instead of being a residence, this structure likely played some form of ceremonial role. It is in the area around this structure that we see some signs for a social hierarchy. Here a group of medium-sized houses were also unearthed that show signs of having been the dwellings of Shipo's more prestigious residents. Notably, some of these buildings contain grindstones that were likely used to process cinnabar, and some archaeologists have theorized that the families that dwelled within may have exercised a degree of control over the manufacture of jade items, which appear to have held a high prestige within these communities. This part of the site is also marked by large amounts of domesticated pig bones, and it has been argued that these elite families may have engaged in competitive displays of feasting to cement their power. In addition to this settlement, possible signs of social hierarchy are also observed at the later Dawenhou site of Wuqi-Su. Whilst we currently lack evidence at Dawenhou sites for the types of labour-intensive ritual architecture seen at Shipo, here linked rows of houses have been found that show disparities in consumption, with the residences of wealthier individuals often containing larger numbers of food vessels. Signs of this emerging elite can also be seen in contemporary burial traditions. During this period, both the Yangshao and Dawenhou cultures continued to display signs of ancestor worship, with people being buried in clusters that likely represented different kin groups. Over time, however, this worship appears to have become more male-biased, with fewer women being selected for veneration. And alongside this increasing gender bias, these graves also display some evidence that the people buried within them were becoming more specialised in their labour, as can be seen in the different selections of tools placed within individual graves. At later Dawenhou sites, we also begin to see an increase in ritual activity concentrated around a small number of larger graves. To take the eponymous site of Dawenhou as an example, during the site's earlier phases, the majority of tombs here would remain small and relatively egalitarian. However, in its later phases, a small number of tombs appear that are significantly larger than others, which often include internal wooden chambers and coffins. Some of these burials also contain a vastly greater assortment of items than the smaller graves, and include prestigious objects such as black pottery goblets, jade and ivory ornaments, stone axes and adzes, turtle shells, and a variety of high-quality ceramic vessels. Alongside this, we also see the inclusion of items that may have held ritual connotations, such as the heads and jawbones of pigs. These objects are frequently found within graves at other sites dating from the period, a practice which seems to have been common throughout eastern China. Around the same time period, Yangshao sites also begin to display an increasingly complex social hierarchy. Whilst the veneration of individual burials appears to have been less pronounced than at Dawenhou settlements during this period, cemeteries unearthed at sites such as Shipo display a range of different grave sizes and goods that may correspond with their occupant's position within the wider hierarchy. These more prestigious graves generally consisted of two-tiered rectangular chambers, with some larger graves also including an additional space below the individual's feet where the grave goods were placed. In addition to common goods such as pottery and bone and stone items, some of these graves also include two distinctive jade items, slender Yue battle axes, along with Huan rings. Upon completion, these tombs were sealed with a layer of mud, and we can tell from impressions found in this layer that large quantities of flowers such as jasmine were likely placed within these graves. Another famous burial with ritual overtones has also been found at the Middle Yangshao site of Shishui-Po. Here the tomb of an adult male has been unearthed that is flanked by a pair of white clamshell mosaics shaped like a tiger and a dragon, the latter of which constitutes the earliest example of this iconography that has yet been discovered. This grave is also surrounded by a number of additional mosaic deposits, including a dipper-shaped object made from human bones and shells, along with the satellite burials of 3 children. Despite these outward signs of hierarchy, we should acknowledge that Yangshao social distinctions still seem to have been somewhat fluid, and that the size of these tombs does not always match the richness of the grave goods placed within. As noted by Professors Li Liu and Xin Kan Chen in their work The Archaeology of China, the 2 largest tombs found at Shipo do not contain any prestigious jade items, and the largest number of Yue axes found on the site were instead placed within a child's grave. It should also be said that the burial at Shishui-Po does not contain any of the more prestigious grave goods seen in the graves at Shipo, and as such it has been theorized by a number of archaeologists that its occupant was more likely to have been a shamanic figure or wu, rather than a wealthy elite. In the long term, however, this trend towards conspicuous elites is one that would continue into the later Neolithic, and social divisions within Chinese societies would grow increasingly complex in the centuries ahead. It is in the later phase of the Yangshao culture, between roughly 3500 to 3000 BCE, that large regional centres such as Shipo went from an outlier to a common feature of the Yellow River Valley. Along the Wei River in the west, we see late Yangshao settlements such as Gaoshou-Tu, Yangguangjai and Angbang emerge, whilst the earlier Neolithic site of Dadiwan grew to cover some 50 hectares during this time. Unlike earlier Yangshao sites, which often contain a mixture of ground-level and semi-subterranean pit houses, these centres are increasingly dominated by the construction of surface-level square houses. As with Shipo, these sites are characterized by the presence of large public buildings at their centers, and at sites such as Dadiwan, residential areas are also marked by the appearance of multi-roomed longhouses or palaces that may have housed the site's leadership. In addition to these large centers in the west, a number of medium-sized sites have also been discovered in the eastern range of this culture. Here, however, these centers appear to become increasingly competitive with one another, and several of these sites display evidence of substantial rammed earth walls that may have held a defensive function. At the site of Xishan in the Zhengzhou region of Hunan province, skeletons have been recovered from a number of ash pits in violent poses, and it has been theorized that conflict between these communities may have shaped their even distribution throughout the landscape. We will return to the development of these large regional centers and the potential role of violence in their evolution during our next episode. For today, however, we have come to the end of our examination of the Middle Neolithic in this region. Instead, let us turn our eyes southwards once again. By the beginning of the Middle Neolithic, new archaeological cultures had emerged throughout both the Middle and Lower Yangtze regions. In our last episode, we detailed the emergence of the early Neolithic Shangshan culture in the latter of these regions, the best snapshot of which can be seen at the site of Kwahuchao. Towards the end of the 6th millennium BCE, this culture would be succeeded by the long-lived Hemudu culture, which consists of more than 30 sites which emerged across the Ningxiao plain. Further north, we also see the appearance of a number of sites associated with the Majabeng culture throughout the late Tai region. From roughly 4000 BCE, this latter culture was gradually succeeded by the Songzhou culture, of which approximately 30 sites have been identified across the Hongjiahu plain. During the course of the 4th millennium BCE, we also see the appearance of the Beiyin Yangying and Shujiagang cultures, which emerged along the Yangtze River valley slightly to the west. As in the north, these settlements display both increased size and density compared to those of the early Neolithic. Whilst the inhabitants of sites associated with these cultures would continue to exploit a wide range of wild plant and animal species, particularly aquatic animals such as fish, shellfish and turtles, it is clear that by the beginning of the Middle Neolithic, intensive rice agriculture was now well underway at these settlements. Evidence for this can be seen in the presence of large amounts of rice remains that have been unearthed at settlements belonging to these cultures, along with a number of early rice paddies that have been excavated at sites such as Shaoxishan, Chenghu, Chodon, and the type site of Hemudu. The oldest example of these, however, has been found at the Hemudu culture site of Tianlushan. This large settlement was established on a flat marshy plain adjacent to the Hangzhou River around 5000 BCE, and is marked by the presence of a large number of pile-dwelling houses that display sophisticated joinery techniques. At its peak, this settlement was likely home to hundreds of people at any given time, who would have survived on a diet of wild deer, water buffalo, and a range of wild plants, whilst also deriving a significant portion of their diet from the rearing of domesticated dogs, pigs, and rice. Much like the earlier settlement of Kwahuchao, this site was heavily waterlogged at the time of its discovery, and as a result many of its features were extremely well preserved. These include a recognisable fence made of a double row of stakes, along with a simple bridge over the nearby river that was constructed using 3 end-to-end oak tree trunks. Alongside these features, nearly 3,000 different organic and non-organic artefacts from the site have also been preserved. These include wooden and bone handles for implements such as knives and spades, along with pestles, oars, and rope and reed mats that comprise some of the earliest surviving textiles discovered in China. And it is also thanks to these conditions that what are thought to be the world's earliest rice paddies have been preserved. In form, these fields are somewhat simple. After being dug out using bone and wood-handled spades, they were likely seeded using tools known as dibble sticks, the remains of 2 of which have been found on the site. These consist of pointed wooden implements that were used to punch holes in the soil, into which a seed would then have been inserted and buried. There is also some evidence that a degree of slash and burn agriculture was involved in their construction, as analysis of the soil of these paddies found traces of charcoal that would have enhanced its fertility. As we discussed in our previous videos, rice is effectively a marsh plant and relies on both a high temperature and an ample supply of water to grow. In more advanced paddies, this water supply is provided by a system of ditches and irrigation channels from surrounding water sources. However, the early fields found at Tianloshan lack these systems, and it is likely that they instead relied on seasonal rainfall, along with flooding from the surrounding marshlands. The presence of the remains of large amounts of weeds in these fields also indicates that it is unlikely that the residents of this site were engaging in heavy management of these fields, as these plants would have competed with their crops for resources and potentially reduced their harvests. Even in their simple forms, however, these fields would still have been capable of producing large quantities of both wild and domesticated rice. As we also discussed in our previous episodes, there is a degree of controversy over when fully domesticated rice first appeared in China. From the evidence we have explored so far in this series, it seems indisputable that rice was undergoing active cultivation since at least the late Paleolithic, and it has also been claimed that the remains of domesticated rice has been observed at the earlier Yangtze sites of Shangshan, Huahuchao, and Bashidang. Whether this is the case or not, by the Middle Neolithic, a significant portion of rice remains found at sites such as Hemudu, Tianloshan, and Chenghu are clearly recognizable as containing domesticated traits, including increased grain size, erect plant growth, and reduced seed chattering that would have allowed for more convenient harvesting. During this period, there is also evidence of similar agricultural intensification in the neighbouring Middle Yangtze region. In our last episode, we discussed the development of the first recognizable cultures in this region, which included the Pengtoshan, Chongbeishi, and later the Lower Zhaoshu cultures. Around 5000 BCE, these cultures gave way to the Dashi culture, which consists of several hundred sites spread over the Zhonghan Plains, reaching as far as the Three Gorges region in the north and the shores of the Dongting Lake in the south. Unlike earlier Lower Zhaoshu and Chongbeishi settlements in the region, which still largely survived on a broad-spectrum hunter-gatherer diet, Dashi sites followed the same trend as the Lower Yangtze Hemudu culture. Whilst these peoples continued to supplement their diet by hunting wild animals such as elephant and water buffalo, along with gathering a wide range of wild plant species, they increasingly came to rely on domesticated rice, pigs, and dogs for their survival. Much as with Hemudu settlements, some Dashi sites are marked by the presence of organised rice paddies, and in order to facilitate their ploughing, these settlements were frequently placed on the edge of rivers, or on spurs of dry land set among surrounding wetlands. Housing styles also evolved during this time, and at many sites dwellings now consisted of rectangular houses constructed from clay and bamboo, and that sometimes had more than one room. A number of larger sites from this culture also show evidence of innovation in both settlement planning and layout. These include substantial moats and rammed earth walls that precede those seen at late Yangshao sites in the north. The best understood example of these is the settlement of Chengtoshan. This site was established around 4500 BCE and is still visible as a large mound some 8 hectares in area that stands 2 meters above the surrounding plain. During its initial establishment, this settlement consisted of an interior village that occupied only a portion of the site, around which its occupants dug a 12-meter wide moat. This was followed by a series of ditches and an encircling rammed earth wall that may have acted both as flood control and a form of defence. Over the course of the Middle Neolithic, the internal village would expand to cover a larger portion of the site's interior, and the surrounding walls were also rebuilt and expanded during its lifetime, a process that would have required vast amounts of attendant labour. Whilst these combined features would have resulted in an effective defensive position, it should be noted that the walls constructed both here and at other settlements in the region in succeeding millennia had only a gradual slope, which may have limited their effectiveness. As a result, it has been argued by Professor Zhang Chu that these features would have required continuous reinforcement, and evidence of both wooden planks and stakes has been unearthed from 4th millennium BC deposits in the walls of both Chengtoshan and those found at the site of Jijiaocheng. Alongside these walls, Chengtoshan's moat was also connected to the nearby river. In addition to providing the settlement with a source of fresh water, this link would have likely facilitated marine transport and trade with the surrounding communities, as shown by the discovery of the remains of both a boat stern and oars in Chengtoshan's moat. Alongside these more visible features, this site is also marked by the presence of substantial rice paddies. Unlike the simple paddies seen at Tianlou-shan, the rice at Chengtou-shan was directly supplied with water using irrigation channels dug from the nearby river, and include a framework of small earthen walls known as bunding that would have been used to ensure water was retained during the plant's growing season. Alongside its other monumental structures, Chengtou-shan's interior settlement also contains one of the few examples of ritual architecture to be found in the Yangtze Basin dating from this period. This structure consists of a wide platform or altar that covers an area of some 200 meters squared, which was built using what the excavators described as clean yellow soil. A large number of pits have been found distributed throughout it, containing the remains of ash, pottery, burnt clay and rice, along with both animal and human bones that it has been argued were ritually sacrificed before being buried. Outside of this structure, a small number of items have been found amongst the communities of the lower Yangtze that may have held some ritual connotations. These include both animal and human clay figures, along with early instruments such as drums, whistles and ocarinas, and ornaments carved from stone, bone, ivory and jade. Some of these ornaments also bear intricate animal patterns. The most notable of these include images of birds carved onto a number of stone daggers, along with two bone and ivory objects that contain images of a pair of long-tailed birds emerging from flaming circles that have been interpreted as a sunbird motif. As in the north, the tools used by the communities of both the lower and middle Yangtze also changed. The earlier flake-based toolset of the region was now largely replaced by groundstone tools, whilst local pottery also began to show an increased range of forms. At Hemudu itself, the earliest pottery appears to have been more crudely made than those at preceding Shangshan culture sites, consisting of unevenly sculpted black vessels that were tempered with charcoal before being fired at a low temperature. A small number of vessels were also painted with a form of black slip, whilst a number of incised ceramics have been found at both Hemudu and Majiabang sites that display impressed and incised patterns. As with the ornaments we discussed before, these patterns depict a number of animal figures such as birds, dogs, pigs, water buffalo, fish, sheep and deer, along with local plant species. By the later Hemudu period, however, pottery production methods seem to have changed again, and there is evidence of complex grey-brown or reddish vessels that are again being made with the aid of slow wheels. Similarly, the Middle Yangtze pottery of this period is often reddish in colour and occasionally displays painted symbols. Over time, these symbols will begin to resemble those found on Yangshao ceramics further to the north, indicating a possible degree of interaction between these cultures. An increasing portion of black ceramics also began to be manufactured, along with a small number of elaborately made vessels painted with white slip. According to Dr. David J. Cohen, however, perhaps the high point of pottery production in this region can be seen in the vessels of the lower Yangtze Songzu culture, which includes elegantly designed vessels that are marked by the use of specific registers for their decorations. Finally, some Hemudu and Dashi settlements also show evidence of increased internal complexity, including dedicated areas for crafts such as pottery and jade making. Compared to contemporary cultures in northern China, the societies of the Yangtze River region appear to have remained relatively egalitarian throughout much of the Middle Neolithic. Housing layouts from this time show little sign of any organised social elite, and whilst the larger walled sites of the Dashi culture may have held a higher political status than smaller villages, the extent of any settlement hierarchy is difficult to determine. Burial traditions at sites such as Hemudu and Tianlou-shan show few signs of ostentatious grave goods or stratified tomb sizes, whilst early Dashi cemeteries show few signs of distinction beyond a small number of ceramics. A major exception to both of these patterns, however, can be seen at Songzu culture sites towards the end of this period. Here, a clear hierarchy between smaller and larger communities is seen to emerge over the course of the 4th millennium BCE, whilst the total number of sites also increases dramatically. Evidence for some form of societal elite can also be seen in burial practices conducted at the Songzu culture sites of Dongshan-tun, Pishan, and Nanhuebang. In addition to a central residential site, Dongshan-tun is marked by 2 organised cemeteries, one of which includes a number of large graves which each contain more than 30 items. In the largest of these burials, more than 60 items were placed alongside the body, which included high-prestige goods such as jade, ceramics, and stone artifacts. Despite the general increase in settlement number during the Songzhou culture, however, cemetery sizes are seen to decrease at these sites over the course of the 4th millennium BCE, and it has been suggested by Dr. Qin Ling that this may reflect increasing separation of societal groups. A small number of ostentatious burials have similarly been found at Chengtoushan, whilst at the Dashi culture site of Wangjiagang, 2 late-period tombs have been found that contain a large number of burial goods. And in addition to these cemeteries, we are also aware of another Lower Yangtze site that far eclipses these burials in terms of both grave goods and size, and that may indicate that an elite group of religious specialists was present in at least parts of this region throughout the Middle Neolithic. We will return to this site shortly. For the moment, however, let us take a brief digression from the more famous cultures of this period to fill in the hole in our map of China. During the first episode of this series, we mentioned that we would also be covering the earliest archaeological cultures to emerge throughout the southernmost parts of China, many of which were associated with the Pearl River Delta. Many of these settlements have continued to be occupied since the preceding late Paleolithic, including the sites of Zongpian, Miaoyan and Dai'an that we discussed in our first episode. Along the Pearl River Delta in southern Guangxi province, we also see the appearance of a large number of shell-midden sites that are collectively known as the Dingsushan culture. Both of these types of communities are marked by simple forms of pottery, along with chipped and polished stone tools, and their occupants appear to have pursued a lifestyle based around the hunting of deer and wild pigs, along with gathering shellfish and digging for taro tubers. As our last episode aimed to focus on early Neolithic farming settlements, and these communities continue to subsist on a hunter-gatherer based diet, we declined to examine them during its course. Around the beginning of the Middle Neolithic, however, we begin to see both technical and cultural changes appearing in this region. After this time, we begin to see the establishment of a small number of open-air sites along river terraces and the Fujian coastline. Over the next millennia, polished stone tools became dominant amongst these communities, and we see evidence that they were producing increasingly refined ceramics. It is not until around 4000 BCE, however, that we see the appearance of early agricultural communities in this region. In addition to the continuing existence of the Dingsushan IV culture, we also see the emergence of the Shantoling culture in the eastern Pearl River Delta. This includes settlements in areas such as Hong Kong and Macau, while slightly to the north in Hunan province, the site of Gaomiao displays its own unique cultural traits. During this time, you also see the emergence of the island-based Kerchuto culture along the Fujian coast, notable sites of which include its eponymous type site, Pingtan and Fuguodong. These sites are marked by the production of large amounts of polished or semi-polished stone axes, adzes and chisels, along with agricultural tools and increasingly complex pottery made using slow wheels. These ceramics were usually sand-tempered, and amongst the Dingsushan IV and Shantoling cultures, there is evidence of white and red painted pottery being produced, whilst vessels in coastal regions are often decorated with shell and fingerprint impressions. Perhaps the most interesting, however, are the intricately patterned vessels seen at Gaomiao. These ceramics are marked out by complex geometric patterns, including images of long-tailed birds, sun and star patterns, and even designs of what appear to be fanged mouths. And as with cultures elsewhere in China, some of these communities also began to rear domesticated animals and rice to provide a portion of their diet. Unlike other areas of China, it has been argued that the emergence of agriculture in this area does not seem to have come as the culmination of a gradual process of local domestication. Whilst there may have been a degree of indigenous development of farming at sites such as Dai'an and Zongpian, it seems most likely that domesticated plants and animals were introduced into this area by cultural exchanges with communities in the Middle and Lower Yangtze regions, where increasing population growth may have resulted in peoples migrating further to the south. In particular, it has been argued that agriculture may have been transmitted to the Shantoling culture from Dashi sites via the Gaomiao culture. Similarly, at Dingsushan IV culture sites, rice agriculture appears alongside the introduction of a mixture of pottery that resembles both that of the Dashi culture to the north and the Shantoling culture to the east. It has also been argued that agriculture was introduced to Kirkuto communities by migrants from Hermudu sites, based on similarities between tool types and pottery styles between the two cultures. It should be noted, however, that despite the introduction of rice agriculture to this region, it does not seem to have become the dominant form of food production. According to Dr. David J. Cohen, the Gao Miao culture may have eventually abandoned agriculture entirely in favour of a more flexible hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Similarly, in more coastal regions, the bulk of people's diets instead seem to have been made up by hunting, fishing and gathering shellfish, and whale and sea turtle remains have also been unearthed at the type site of Kirkuto. By this point, the peoples of these regions also seem to have developed advanced seafaring capabilities. In Taiwan during this period, you also see the emergence of the Daben Kung culture during the 5th millennium BCE. By the first half of the 3rd millennium BCE, this long-lived culture is marked by the appearance of domesticated rice and dogs, a development that has been linked to maritime cultural exchanges and potential migration between its inhabitants and peoples from the Fujian and Guangdong coasts. And if we look far beyond these areas, there is also increasingly a consensus amongst academics that in the millennia ahead, a number of further seaborne dispersals of peoples would originate outwards from this region. This topic remains hotly debated amongst archaeologists and geneticists. If this was indeed the case though, then it could mean that the Neolithic peoples of southeastern China may have contributed to the ancestry of the Austronesian-speaking peoples, who in the millennia ahead would migrate throughout large portions of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. So by 3000 BCE, we have strong evidence that most of the communities of both northern and southern China had become fully reliant on a sedentary way of life, living in large settlements sustained by intensive agriculture. In the north, we see evidence of widespread hierarchies present within and between settlements, whilst in the south we see examples of specialised craft areas that are a harbinger of the differentiation of function seen in early cities. The cultures of these regions would continue to develop and evolve into the 3rd millennium BCE, and in our next episode we will see them develop into China's earliest urbanised communities and states. Before we finish today, however, there is one more culture dating from the Chinese Middle Neolithic that so far has gone unmentioned in this episode, and that in many ways is perhaps its strangest and least understood. The time has come for us to return our attention to the northeast. Here we see the emergence of an idiosyncratic culture that bears both features similar to those of other Middle Neolithic societies, and that is also marked by dramatic departures from the social and ritual organisation of much of China during this time. In our last episode, we covered the emergence of the early Neolithic Xinglonghua culture throughout the northeast, which bore a strong resemblance to other contemporary communities throughout northern China. Around 5200 BCE, the Xinglonghua culture would be succeeded in this region by the Zhoubaogou culture, which consists of some 100 sites distributed throughout a broad area of the Liao River system. The material remains of this culture show strong continuity with its predecessor, with its peoples continuing to pursue a broad-spectrum hunter-gatherer diet, supplemented by a degree of low-level crop cultivation. Ritual practices also continued to revolve around the production of female and animal figures made from clay and stone, along with the continuing production of elaborate jade artifacts. However, there are a few signs of increasing societal complexity to be found amongst these sites. For example, the proportion of groundstone tools slowly began to increase, and in addition to producing relatively plain pottery similar to that found in Xinglonghua settlements, these villages are also seen to manufacture small numbers of more elaborate painted and engraved vessels whose patterns may have had a ritual component. The context in which this pottery was discovered has also been taken as evidence of a degree of social hierarchy emerging within these settlements. Rather than being evenly distributed across Zhoubaogou sites, this more complex pottery is found in only a small proportion of households. As a result, some archaeologists have theorized that the occupants of these dwellings may have held a prestigious role within their settlements, possibly conducting communal feasts and engaging in long-distance exchanges of prestigious items with surrounding communities. And in addition to this possible emerging hierarchy, there are also some small hints of public architecture to be found in these communities, such as a stone altar that has been unearthed near the type site of Jiaobaogo. Then from around 4500 BCE, the Jiaobaogo culture was slowly succeeded by the Hongshan culture. The emergence of this culture is associated with a vast increase in the number of sites, which appear in a density not matched anywhere else in China during this period. Currently over 500 are known from surface surveys, though only a small proportion of these have been excavated. Of the ones that have, only a few have been residential centres, and as a result our understanding of the day-to-day lives of their peoples is less robust. From the evidence we have, it seems that most Hongshan settlements consisted of small villages of subterranean pit dwellings covering only a few hectares, though a broad range of sites have been observed during surface surveys ranging from simple homesteads to large villages with populations of perhaps a few hundred. Here the buildings are generally much smaller than those of the preceding Xinglonghua and Jiaobaogo cultures, and were constructed in simple rows, sometimes clustered in small groupings that may indicate different family or social units. Whilst the lifestyles of their inhabitants appear to have still resembled those of earlier cultures in the region, there is also evidence that Hongshan communities placed greater investment in rearing domesticated dogs, pigs, and millet. Whilst microliths remain common throughout the region during this period, we also see increasing numbers of spades appearing at Hongshan sites, along with leaf-shaped and rectangular stone knives that may have been used to harvest cereals. These settlements also display an increased degree of political integration. For example, a systemic survey of sites in the Chefeng region have found that most of its local communities were clustered into a number of territories or districts that may represent simple chiefdoms. These appear to have controlled areas of a few kilometres squared, and may have held sway over a few hundred individuals based in up to a dozen settlements. From the evidence found at these residential sites then, it seems that these communities were beginning to place greater emphasis on agriculture and were beginning to form simple political units. Outside of these general features, there is also evidence of strong cultural links between Hongshan communities and the cultures of the north during this time. While some sites continue to produce pottery resembling those of the Xinglonghua and Jiaobaogo cultures, at many Hongshan sites, new pottery forms and designs emerged that resemble those of the Yangshao culture. Finally, a number of genetic studies have argued that the increased adoption of agriculture in this region may have been stimulated by the arrival of people from the Yellow River Basin, who may have brought with them their farming lifestyle and cultural practices. As in other northern societies from this period, we can also tell from the burial practices conducted at these sites that some degree of social hierarchy was likely present in Hongshan communities. For example, at the sites of Nan Taizu and Baiyin Changhan, cemeteries show a variety of grave sizes, ranging from simple pit tombs without offerings to stone-lined burials filled with prestigious items. In one elaborate example found at Nan Taizu, a single grave contained the bodies of 4 individuals, one of whom was buried wearing a pair of jade earrings, and around whom were placed a range of tools and pottery, along with grindstones and shell ornaments. But when we examine Hongshan ritual practices outside of these residential settlements, then the picture we have is very different from the ones we have seen anywhere else in China. Whilst the neighbouring cultures of northern China appear to have invested in public architecture based within their own settlements, many Hongshan communities appear to have spent significant time and labour constructing a number of dedicated ceremonial sites separated from their surrounding residential centres. These include Dongshanzui, Suijiazu, Hutogo and New Huliang, each of which consists of a cluster of different sites spread over a wide area that were built and iterated on over the course of several centuries. These centres are often placed in foothills bordering mountainous areas and are most common throughout a roughly 150 km by 50 km region that archaeologists refer to as the core zone. The most distinctive structure found at these sites are a type of square or circular stepped platform which have been interpreted by their excavators as a form of altar. In certain cases, large amounts of painted pottery cylinders were also incorporated into their construction, with some platforms containing hundreds of these items. The largest known example of these altars has been found at New Huliang and consists of a pyramid-shaped building some 100 meters long and which still stands nearly 7 meters tall today. A number of these structures are also marked by a central stone-lined shaft tomb cut deep into the ground below, whilst a number of other satellite graves have also been found within these altars' vicinity. These tombs contain large amounts of prestigious jade items, which display a level of craftsmanship that is largely unparalleled elsewhere in China during the Middle Neolithic, and that appear in a quantity that is unknown in neighbouring northern communities. These items range from personal ornaments such as beads, earrings, rings and pendants, to decorative versions of tools such as axes, adzes and awls, and finally ritual paraphernalia such as carved human and animal figures. While some of these figures still resemble the animal and female imagery of the preceding Xinglonghua and Jiaobaogou cultures, we also see a flourishing of new forms. Whilst a number of small clay female figures have been found in the vicinity of these structures that resemble earlier Xinglonghua figures, Hongshan jades also include a number of sexless figures, some of which display animal-like features. Unlike earlier animal forms, which often depicted the wild animals that the residents of this region would have hunted for survival, we also see depicted creatures such as birds and turtles that do not seem to reflect the local diet. Alongside these, we also see the presence of composite creatures with supernatural elements, including a number of examples of what are referred to as pig dragons. Outside of these structures, Hongshan ritual sites are also marked by the presence of groups of shaft tombs similar to those found within the platforms. At New Huliang, another enigmatic structure has also been unearthed. Known as the Goddess Temple, this semi-subterranean structure consists of a 14-meter-long L-shaped foundation that once supported a substantial timber frame, along with wattle and daub walls. At the time of its construction, these walls were plastered in white lime, onto which red geometric patterns were painted. Inside, the fragments of several animal and humanoid clay statues have been discovered, the most famous of which consists of a life-size female face mask with inlaid jade eyeballs. These humanoid statues range in scale from life-size to 3 times life-size, and the presence of female characteristics such as sculpted breasts led to the coining of the building's name. A smaller but more complete male statue has also been unearthed from a house foundation, the residential site of Xinglonggou, which likely also played some form of ceremonial role. In addition to these statues, this goddess temple was placed in close proximity to a deposit of nearly 100 pottery cylinders, along with a smaller building and a large stone-walled earthen platform that covered several thousand square meters. This latter feature in particular could have accommodated a large number of people simultaneously, and is marked by at least 3 altars, along with surrounding pits that contain domestic waste and leftover jade. The exact social dynamics suggested by these sites have been the source of wide-reaching discussion. It is tempting to think of the individuals buried within the elaborate tombs of this core area as powerful chieftains, exerting a greater amount of influence over the communities that surrounded these ritual centres than those outside of this zone. If these figures were rulers of large proto-states, then the greater manpower they could marshal may in turn explain the increased investment in public architecture in this zone. Indeed, it is common for these sites to be placed in the proximity of a number of residential settlements, and some archaeologists have theorised that these ritual centres may have been used by many thousands of people. And if we are to venture into more controversial territory, it has even been claimed by a number of archaeologists that Hongshan society contains many uniquely Han Chinese cultural elements, and that the whole region may have been both economically and politically integrated. As noted by archaeologists such as Robert Drennan and Christian Peterson, however, these claims often go beyond what can be directly inferred from the archaeological evidence. Whilst there is plentiful evidence that these figures held positions of high prestige throughout the surrounding communities, the idea that the polities they headed were larger or more powerful than those outside of this core zone has proven difficult to sustain. For example, there is little evidence that the communities surrounding these ceremonial sites were much larger than those outside of this region, And whilst the monumental architecture found at these centres is impressive, it has been argued that features such as the square and circular platforms could have been constructed by a group of perhaps 100 people, labouring for little more than a month. Moreover, there are some hints that investment in monumental ritual centres within the core Hongshan zone may have been more of a cultural difference between the people of this region and those who dwelled in other Hongshan settlements. Whilst our picture of life outside the core zone is limited to only a small number of excavated centres, sites such as Fushan Zhuang have shown some evidence that its residents may have instead invested in ritual architecture situated within their own settlement. Here 4 rubble mounds containing shards of painted pottery cylinders have been found, which bear a distinct similarity to the platforms of the core region. The more modest evidence for social hierarchies seen in Hongshan settlements, along with the lack of any utilitarian goods in these platform burials, has also led to suggestions that the figures buried within these platforms may have been religious specialists rather than powerful chieftains. A third possibility is that these figures may have performed something of a hybrid role, as the heads of many early societies are known to have combined a ritual or religious role with leadership of their communities. It has also been argued that these individuals may have been associated with the crafting of the fine jades seen in their burials. As we discussed before, the production of these objects would have required specialists with tremendous skill, and it is possible that the ability to make these prestigious objects would have seemed an act akin to magic, one that bestowed a high status on those capable of performing it. Conversely, the production of these items may have been facilitated through elite sponsorship, whose power may in part have been derived from controlling their distribution. For a time, it was thought that the artistry and ritual practices of the Hongshan culture were without parallel elsewhere in China during the Middle Neolithic. In the last 20 years, however, a series of new discoveries have shown that there was another culture dating from this period that manufactured similarly ornate jade items, that constructed square and circular altars associated with elite burials, and that some archaeologists have even argued display cultural links with the peoples of the northeast. Paradoxically, however, this culture was not to be found anywhere in the north. Instead, it was found much further to the south, in the lower Yangtze region. Here along the shores of one of its tributaries, a vast site known as Lingjiatan has been found that covers some 160 hectares. This settlement was established around 3700 BCE, and whilst its residential sections have not yet been excavated, a series of investigations at the site's centre have unearthed a substantial burial complex. Of the graves that have been found here, the details of some 48 have been reported, and between them they display a varying amount of burial goods. The poor soil conditions of the region have meant that few human remains have survived from these graves, but their importance can be seen from the vast number of jade items that have been found within them, the quantity of which far eclipses those found at Hongshan centres. Whilst the jade-containing tombs at New Huliang include around 3 to 4 items on average, the average for the reported tombs at Lingjiatan is over 25, though these items are often much smaller than those seen at Hongshan sites. The most elaborate of these burials contains nearly 200 jade items in total, along with 97 stone objects and a large number of ceramic vessels. These items include decorative huan and jue rings, discs, bangles and pendants, along with a pair of yue axes, several hand axes and a chisel. In addition to these practical and ornamental shapes, jades from other burials also include human and animal figures. The latter of these include birds, turtles, rabbits, pigs and tigers, along with a dragon biting its own tail, and a standing composite figure of a bird with pig heads emerging from its wings and a complex sun motif carved into its body. Elsewhere, a plaque has also been found inserted between the two parts of a decorative turtle shell that bears an octagonal geometric motif. As noted by Professors Li Liu and Xin Kan Chen, such is the degree of artistry in their construction that one of the human figures unearthed here contains a drilled hole that is less than 1 millimeter in diameter. A small number of jade-producing tools have even been found at the graves here, including a sandstone drill, and the presence of large amounts of jade waste in more richly furnished graves has led some archaeologists to argue that these elite figures may have been involved in the production of these objects. The abundance of these jade items, along with the artistry involved in their crafting, has naturally provoked comparisons with those found at Hongshan culture sites. Interestingly, some of the artifacts produced by these cultures also display similar poses, such as human figures standing with their arms folded across the chest, and a similar range of animals is represented in both cultures. However, Hongshan items are often carved from higher quality sources of jade than those seen at Lingjiatan, and their figurines are more biased in favour of animal rather than human figures. In addition to this burial complex, this site also includes a 30 by 40 metre platform that was constructed from a mixture of compacted soil and rammed earth, and which contains copious amounts of pottery sherds. This platform was marked by a number of internal burials, along with 3 sacrificial pits containing animal bones and broken pottery, and 4 circular piles of white stones that have been interpreted by its excavators as altars. Based on these features, it has been theorized that much as with the Hongshan ritual sites, Lingjiatan may have served as a center for the wider region, where communal ceremonies were conducted and the elites of its communities were buried. A number of similar jade items resembling pendants and earrings have also been found at some contemporary Lower Yangtze sites, and it is possible that these items may represent Lingjiatan exports. Going by the features of this site, along with the various forms of jade statue that have been found within its burials, a number of archaeologists have even attempted to infer cosmological details about the beliefs of its peoples. Much of this speculation has revolved around the decorative turtle shell and plaque that we mentioned briefly before, with scholars such as Professor Li Xin-wei arguing that its dimensions may reflect the shape of the universe as conceived by the Lingjiatan people. Whatever the validity of this claim, it seems likely that both turtle and tortoise shells were important ritual items throughout large parts of China during the Neolithic, as seen by their representation in Hongshan and Lingjiatan jades, as well as their inclusion in graves and ritual deposits at early Neolithic sites such as Jiahu. The end of the Middle Neolithic is marked by a change in China's climate. Whilst the preceding 4,000 years had seen occasional episodes of environmental deterioration, this period had been largely characterized by a warm, wet climate which had helped facilitate population growth amongst China's Neolithic communities. Around 3000 BCE, however, this favourable climate came to an end. The exact onset of this change appears to have varied between different parts of China, but around this time much of the north saw a decrease in temperature. The summer monsoon retreated southwards, and the rainfall of these regions fell dramatically. At roughly the same time, the widespread ritual activity associated with the Hongshan culture began to decline. Its major sites fell out of use, and in the centuries ahead there is little evidence for the building of large-scale public architecture in this region. Its growing tendency towards sedentary agriculture was replaced by a more mobile pastoral lifestyle, and only small numbers of jade items were manufactured during this time. In the lower Yangtze region, the jade-producing site of Lingjiatan may also have seen a dramatic reduction in population after 3300 BCE, though whether this was the result of environmental decline is unclear. Despite the collapse of these cultures, however, many of the other major societies of northern and southern China would persist into the late Neolithic. In the lower Yangtze region, we see the emergence of the South's first large-scale settlements, which in the centuries ahead may have grown into early proto-states. Along the Yellow River, complex communities would also continue to grow and compete with one another, eventually forming into arguably the earliest states in Chinese history. Join me in our next episode, when we'll enter a period known in ancient Chinese literature as the Era of 10,000 States. It is during this period that we see the development of China's earliest cities, of complex metalworking, and of organized warfare. And it is in the context of this newfound conflict that we also see the emergence of what might be China's first dynasty. We'll explore all this and more next time.